Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Welcome into the GSMC Football Podcast right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Brice Lewis. And obviously, you know we do here on the podcast. We talk about everything NFL and college, depending on whatever is most circulating in the news ranks by the time this is recording. And today we're going to continue on with my previews of teams by division. Last week we did the AFC East, so I talked about the New England Patriots, Miami Dolphins, New York Jets, and the Buffalo Bills coming into this season as we're starting to get closer to the start of preseason, regular season football. But also some other things along the way. So we're going to keep that format primarily the same today. Obviously there is some news in the NFL, so I'll definitely give you that today on the podcast to let you know some big things or some things that they're still considering, obviously with COVID-19 still around, potentially changing things. Obviously, if you listen to me and Ethan's podcast, when ours drops on Tuesday, you know, we go into more detail about a lot of stories around the league. So obviously, you know, it really just depends on, you know, when you're listening to our podcast, what are you looking for? What do you want from it? So we're going to continue on that today. And, you know, hopefully just have another good show like we always do here on the GSMC podcast. So let's go ahead and get right into it with the top story. Something that I've said before, actually, on the podcast. The NFL and NFLPA discussing players' potential opt-out date for the 2020 season. So, I have said this before. I said, listen, you see every league, you're having players opt out, not return, because of COVID-19 concerns, because they don't want to put maybe their families at risk or whoever they know at risk, or don't want to put themselves at risk, and etc. Well, now, obviously, one league that never really talked about it right now was the NFL, because the NFL has always been a very unique situation. When COVID hit, it was after their season ended. You could do free agency and the draft and everything like that virtually. You didn't have to be in person, even though that would be a preferred method. But the season, you can't avoid that. You have to do it if you're going to play the games. And so I said, you could see players, you could see guys saying, hey, I'm not comfortable playing in this type of atmosphere, in this type of environment that we're playing in right now with COVID-19. So you could see players basically say, I'm not 100% willing to play, and I think I'm going to sit out the season. That's why players, you know, who may be holding out for money may even say, I'm not only just holding out for money, I'm holding out because of COVID. So, and if you want me to play during all this, you better pay me. So that's kind of where we are with it. And obviously that has led now to the NFL and NFLPA discussing a potential opt-out day for players who may not want to come. You know, Tom Pizzero of NFL Network explained the situation on Wednesday on the NFL Network, which I'll say right here, and I quote, "My understanding is both the union and the league intend to have an opt-out for players who have either a pre-existing condition, family members with pre-existing conditions, just general concerns over COVID-19, would not want to play this season. General managers were told on call earlier this week there would be a specific date by which players would need to opt out. That date is still being determined." So obviously that's going to be a big deal going into the season, as I've said, because if they decide to not want to deal with COVID-19, you could see multiple players dropping out. Obviously, training camps are expected to start around July 28th, so we still are a couple of weeks away from the season starting. Obviously, we already know the league has shortened the preseason to 2 games, even though there has been some discussions within the NFLPA to try to push for no games. And like I said, seeing what other leagues have been doing around the sporting world for the most part, you've seen, baseball is short this season, but still people are opting out. Some of their best players have opted out. So you can tell they're not willing to risk it. We've obviously seen in MLS, a whole team isn't going to play because of COVID-19, because I believe 10 players and coaches got COVID. Obviously, you see what's happening in basketball. The Brooklyn Nets, literally 6 of their top players got COVID, and they're all not coming to play in Orlando. So, obviously, you can see this definitely can affect some big names, and it'll be very big in the NFL if maybe a big name decided to not want to be a part and play. That would be a pretty big deal, because if they don't come and play, now you're losing your stars, which could affect ratings, and the NFL obviously don't play about the ratings. So we'll have to see. I mean, listen, Stephon Diggs released a tweet the other day as well, also giving a vibe that maybe a lot of players feel about the situation. And his tweet said this: "But there's so many unanswered questions with this upcoming season. I'd be lying if I said I was comfortable starting back." And this is going to be a big thing I think a lot of players feel and have felt for a while. And it'll be interesting to see what they decide to do and how they decide to go about it. You will probably start to see more players maybe sharing it. I mean, listen, the NFL just banned jersey swaps, and Richard Sherman already criticized that and said, listen, you say we have to play a full contact sport, but we can't change jerseys. Right. If I didn't get COVID during the game, why would I get COVID because of a jersey swap? And it's just something that you might see more players speak out on, because they're unhappy about what's going on, and they're unhappy about the handling of the NFL. Remember, the players are already very iffy about their own league in terms of handling crucial situations and social justice. Now, if they mess it up in health too, it's just like, how can you sit here and say you care about us, but you make these decisions that kind of go against our best interests at the end of the day? So we'll have to see what happens with that. But today, we're going to talk about the AFC West, as I said at the beginning of the show, give them a preview of the season, everything that's happened up to this point in the offseason, as we're about to start hitting training camps by the end of the month, preseason if they still have games next month, and then regular season, as far as we know, still starting on time in September. So the team we're going to talk about this segment is the Las Vegas Raiders. Yes, sir, no longer your Oakland Raiders, the Las Vegas Raiders. They have moved to a big, well, by market size, it's not a big city, but it's one of the most well-known and one of the most popular cities in all of the United States. Las Vegas, Sin City, casino gambling town, big one of probably, if not the biggest tourist attraction we have here in America. Las Vegas has a team. Stadium looks absolutely beautiful, and the Raiders are ready to start their new, I guess, history in Las Vegas, And so, obviously, when they were the Oakland Raiders, we see what the Oakland Raiders were. They got John Gruden. They got Mike Mayock as GM. The Raiders, these last 2 years, have shown the ability to draft. They have drafted some good players the last few years. Mike Mayock, all the years at NFL Network scouting, have better be able to draft some players. And John Gruden can find talent as well. Even though it seems like they're not always looking eye to eye on certain personnel decisions, it seems like they can make the right decisions when it comes to draft picks. So, when you look at the situation, and you look at what's going on, the Raiders made an interesting move this offseason, because they really didn't make too many crazy moves this offseason. But they made an interesting move to sign Marcus Mariota. Obviously, they have Derek Carr. But ever since John Gruden has been there, there's always been a rumor that he was never 100% sold on Derek Carr. So he's always been open to moving off of Derek Carr if he could find a better alternative. And so they brought in Marcus Mariota, obviously a former first-round draft pick by the Tennessee Titans. Showed some flashes, but just could never be consistent. And eventually lost his job to Ryan Tannehill last season, and we saw how that went with Tennessee. Now he has a second chance in Las Vegas. Sorry, you got to get used to that. You know how hard it was when like the Rams moved and then like the Chargers moved. You were so used to just saying the other names, but not LA. It's probably gonna be like that with the Raiders a little bit. But in Las Vegas, he has a chance to start over and show people that he's not a bust. And obviously, some people are thinking that you might see both of them start this year. Where if Derek Carr has a bad or two games, that he won't hesitate to put in Marcus Mariota. And so could there be a potential quarterback controversy in Las Vegas this year? If Derek Carr does not play up to the standard that John Gruden has set, if he thinks, or what he thinks that the Las Vegas Raiders need to be successful at the end of the day. That's going to be the big question. That's going to be the lingering question in Las Vegas. Listen, they still have Rookie of the Year runner-up Josh Jacobs. They clearly have a running attack, and they also have one of the better offensive lines in all of the league. That's one thing about that offense. They can run the football, and they have a good offensive line. So in terms of protection and run blocking, they can do it. They just need the quarterback to play up the part. They have some weapons on the outside. Darren Waller's a tight end that a lot of people, especially in the fantasy scene last year, saw how he was valuable to the team. You know, Terrell Williams. You know, they got some guys. They just drafted Jerry Jeudy. Sorry, not Jerry Jeudy. His teammate, actually, from Alabama, Henry Ruggs III. Because, you know, Oakland loves speed. Again, Las Vegas. As you can tell, people, this is very difficult to kind of keep in place. But, Las Vegas got more speed with Henry Ruggs, so they have this explosive deep threat / maybe a Tyreek Hill type of player. I think that's what John Gruden was hoping when he drafted Henry Ruggs. He was hoping that he could get a Tyreek Hill, a guy who could basically be your number one, but is literally impossible to cover because he's too fast for most players. And that could open up things for other wide receivers they have on the team as well. Obviously, their biggest weakness has been defense, which they tried to address with some signings and some draft picks this offseason. And, you know, for the most part, they really tried their best to get themselves in a better position. I mean, they selected Damon Arnetta from Ohio State with their second first-round pick this year to help solidify corner, because the secondary, especially last year, was a mess for Oakland. They could not stop the pass to save their life last year. They ranked in the bottom part of the league in pass defense. They ranked very low in a lot of defensive categories, but they really struggled. They also drafted in the third round Tanner Moose from Clemson as well. So clearly they were able to do some things. They had a lot of draft picks this year in that sense of just getting some quality depth guys for defense, you know, trying to get something there to help out, like I said, with the defensive secondary, because their secondary help was very, 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 very much needed. Because that was very important for them to make sure that they get that, you know, done. They signed Malik Collins, a quality defensive tackle, up beefing the defensive end. They signed a decent amount of Cowboy players, NFC East players, and because they also got Nelson Aguilar to help out. You know, Corey Littleton, Carl Nassib, DeMarcus Randall. Obviously, you could tell they really did put some money in on the defensive side of the ball. They're trying to get that defense better. Oakland is a team nobody's talking about in the AFC West, is maybe an up-and-coming team, a team that could maybe make some noise. I think from a roster perspective, they almost made the playoffs last year. I don't think they'll be that bad this year in terms of talent on the team. I think the defense will be more improved. I think the biggest thing is just they're in a tough division because the Chargers are getting better. Broncos are probably looked at as one of the most hottest dark horse teams in the NFL. The Chiefs, you don't really see them falling off anytime soon either. So where will Oakland end up? This is probably the second most competitive division in football. Third or second. Because remember, NFC South and AFC East are up there. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with Oakland this year. Again, Las Vegas. Again, I apologize to all my Las Vegas Raider fans who are in Las Vegas. But it's going to be interesting what happens with them. Because if they don't win, Gruden, nobody's talking about it either, could be gone. So very crucial that they come out, play well this year, and get to the playoffs, I think. That would probably be enough to save his job and to look at this season as a successful season in the first season in all of Las Vegas. They have 4 primetime games, too, so obviously the NFL is putting a lot of stock into them being a good and relevant team this year as well. But that's all we have here for the first segment of the podcast. Coming up next, we have more NFL news, talk, and continuing of the AFC West, reviewing another team, which we'll talk about Kansas City up next, and some news revolving around Patrick Mahomes, obviously signing that over $500 million contract this week. All that here and more on the podcast.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's GSMCpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we discussed the NFL, the NFLPA, discussing options, a potential date for players to say if they're going to participate in the 2020-2021 football season. As obviously with COVID-19 return, there's concerns. Not every player is comfortable playing in these conditions. And so some players may not want to play, and so I think they're going to give players the chance to be able to get out of it if they're not comfortable with the situation. And you might see a lot of players do that. Obviously, I'm sure by giving the date, they can help rosters say, okay, we're going to keep these guys for depth. And you never know if that could change Super Bowl favorites if certain players decide not to play, and etc. So we'll have to see what happens when it comes to COVID-19 and how it affects the NFL as we're getting closer to their playing season coming around. Also, we discussed the Las Vegas Raiders as they're going into their first season in Las Vegas as basically a new franchise in a new city. And we discussed their preview of their season. Obviously, the Derek Carr, Marcus Mariota dynamic will be very interesting to look at going forward because we don't know necessarily how that will turn out. And also, I think the Raiders overall are a better team than they were last year, but with the division being a better division, will that necessarily lead to something different? But now we're going to get into our piece of news before we get into our next team. And obviously this is more of, I guess, a discussion point for me where, well, I guess a question now is, after Patrick Mahomes signs a $500 million contract for 10 years this week with Kansas City, what does that mean for other quarterbacks? What does that mean for the Dak Prescotts, the Lamar Jacksons, the Deshaun Watsons of the world? Now, this is my perception on the contract that Patrick Mahomes got. If you didn't listen to me on Monday or Tuesday when this podcast dropped with Ethan, I said that I don't think this is going to be a dramatic, okay, now everybody's going to get $400 million. I think Mahomes is an outlier, but now he's created a lot of space between that top salary and that second salary. And the biggest thing about the salary is like, it's not like a quarterback can't get $40 million a year like he did. It's just in terms of the length of the contract and the overall money into this contract, players won't get that. But it does also give a lot of leeway as well. Because another player that's coming up that people think might get around the same money as Patrick Mahomes is Deshaun Watson. They have been discussing, would this put him in that category? Because everybody knew that they were going to pay Deshaun a lot of money. But, you know, is it going to be too much? Are they going to meet in the middle potentially between that second biggest contract and that first biggest contract at the quarterback position? What is that going to look like? How will that affect Deshaun? If you look at a Dak Prescott who still doesn't have a contract, if he doesn't get a contract agreed to with Jerry Jones, how is that going to affect negotiations next year? Will Dak ask for even more money than he did this year because of the fact Patrick Mahomes got the money? And what if Deshaun Watson gets his contract before Dak signs his? Especially if the Dak was able to lead the Cowboys to like a successful winning season, win his division, maybe gets to the NFC Championship game, he's going to have more argument to say, yeah, I want the contract even bigger than I wanted it last year. And then even with Lamar Jackson. Remember, Lamar Jackson is going into his second full year as a starter. If he comes out here and let's say he wins the Super Bowl this year, let's say he gets Baltimore to the Super Bowl and wins it, why shouldn't he get Patrick Mahomes money? Basically, in the first 2 full years of starting for both players, they won an MVP and a Super Bowl championship. So it creates a lot of there's this big unknown gap now with quarterbacks. Like, now where are you going to pay a top guy? Where are you going to, pay your franchise quarterback? Where do you value him? Because we know obviously quarterback contracts are going to continue to go up. I mean, literally, the salary cap's supposed to keep going up, which is another reason why these numbers go up. But what does that mean for other guys? What does that mean for other quarterbacks? What does that mean for other guys who are maybe in line to get an extension soon? Where will they end up? Will you see someone get a $200 million contract, a $250 million contract, a $300 million contract? All of that is in that realm of possibility. Still maybe not as big as Mahomes. You could see Deshaun get a $300 million contract for 8 years. Or 7 years. I mean, that's legitimately how it could be. And maybe get $150 million up to incentives. Or $350 million up to incentives. I mean, it really... The contract construction that Patrick Mahomes got really has changed the game in terms of quarterback negotiations in my mind. And it just will be very interesting now from this point on to see how teams go about, potentially making that money that will be needed. It'll be interesting to see how it all turns out and how it all comes together. Because if it doesn't turn out well, if it doesn't turn out the right way, then there could be problems moving forward. And you don't know if this will create more issues within the negotiating room for quarterbacks and general managers and owners, because everybody's trying to get something at least similar to Patrick Mahomes' deal, but maybe owners and GMs may not be as willing to let that go. So we'll have to see how it really affects other quarterback negotiations now that Mahomes has gotten this deal, and we see the magnitude in the size of this deal as well. We have to see how it affects other quarterbacks' contract negotiations, and if it changes the game in terms of quarterback negotiations going forward. So it's going to be interesting to see what ends up happening. It definitely will. So we'll have to keep an eye on that. But so now we're going to continue in our AFC West preview of each team, and now we're going to get into the Kansas City Chiefs, since we already were talking about the fall of Patrick Mahomes' big contract. And obviously Kansas City is the defending Super Bowl champions. Patrick Mahomes just got paid. Andy Reid won his first championship. They were to re-sign a lot of their key guys. Everybody's sitting on cloud nine. Everybody is sitting on cloud nine right now. In Kansas City, everybody's feeling good. Sammy Watkins already came back and said they're going to run it back to back this year. And listen, until further known or further prove otherwise, they should be the favorites in the AFC. They should be. You still have Patrick Mahomes, who is considered the best QB in the NFL in a lot of people's eyes. You still have his amazing weapons, Sammy Watkins, Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, Nicole Hardman. You still have them. They just drafted Clyde Edwards from LSU with Damian Williams. Offensively, they should still be one of the best teams in the NFL next year. They should still be able to drop 40 at any time next year with this offense. And then to me, I think what's going to be interesting is the advancement of their defense. Because their defense is the reason why they were able to get to that point. Why they were able to get to the Super Bowl, because they made improvements. And they were willing to make some things happen defensively that they didn't. Obviously, Tyreek Matthew was a big addition, having to make plays in the secondary. That was obviously a very big move. Like I said, usually with Super Bowl teams, they don't make too many moves with the roster. I mean, for the most part, they just re-signed a lot of guys. They picked up Taco Charlton and Mike Remmers from the Giants and the Dolphins. Chris Jones, obviously, we'll have to see what happens with that. I've already discussed that they are having some issues. He has said that if he does not get paid, he would consider sitting out the season. He was one of the people I said was one of the reasons why. He could also use COVID as an excuse to not play as well. You're underpaying me. I don't want to play on the franchise, and COVID's going on. So he could obviously have some leverage in that situation. And basically, yeah, they basically have most of the same team back next year. We're going to have to see. I mean, Kansas City, one thing that makes them special is that they're so dynamic. They're so... They're able to do things that a lot of teams can't. They could beat you with literally every facet of the game. Like, literally. Like, sometimes you just have a very dominant deep play team, or you're a very dominant tight ends, or very dominant wide receiver, but they literally have domination at every level. They could dominate you over the middle, because Travis Kelce is considered by a lot of people, if not George Kittle, the best tight end in the game. You have Tyreek Hill, who is probably one of the top 4 or 5 wide receivers in the game. And he's also one of the fastest players in the league. You got 2 dynamic running backs who can catch out of the backfield and become threats, and can run the ball if needed. You got one of the best quarterbacks, one of the most talented quarterbacks we have maybe even seen of all times. Offensively, they are going to be the reason why they always have a chance in every game, and then they have another chance to win a Super Bowl. But like I said, defensively, they can keep it up. If they can get Chris Jones back and playing, they still have Frank Clark and Chris Jones up front, manning the front. They still have Tyreek Matthew making plays in the back end. They lost Kendall Ford, but I think they'll be able to find a replacement for him. Their defense, obviously, will probably never be an elite defense by any sort of the imagination. But they will always be a good enough defense who can make plays timely, they can be a playmaking defense. Doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be top 10, top 5 defense. They may be 15th, 16th, but they may be top 5 in turnovers. And that's what you would rather have, because that way, you know you're making game-changing plays. And with that kind of offense that they have, and them getting extra possessions, you kind of look at it like, well, how would you beat these guys? Like I said, Kansas City has the complete right and the complete, reason to believe that they're going to come into the season and be the favorite going into the next season, because they have done the most in terms of just putting their team together. They still have Andy Reid, one of the best offensive minds in the game. Innovative. Feels like he's adding new plays every year. I'm sure with Patrick Mahomes, he feels like we could try this, we could try that, we could try this, we could try that. He probably feels like, listen, I have a great team. We need to maximize their potential to the fullest. Listen, it makes you wonder what would have happened if they were able to beat the Patriots and they got the Super Bowl. if they beat the Rams, they could be back-to-back Super Bowl champions right now. Would that, and then we wonder, would that have increased Patrick Mahomes' even contract even more? Like literally. The Chiefs are a team, they're starting to maybe become the New England Patriots, where every year you expect them to be in the playoffs. And you expect them to be good every year. There is no reason why. It doesn't matter if it looks like they're losing people. You just expect them to be there. That's why I've even said with New England not having the weapons they had, even with Cam, people are still very hesitant to say, oh, they're not going to be that good this year. Because it's the Patriots. It feels like, why would you say that? Why would you think that? It's the Patriots. Why would you think they're not going to be good this year? And so, that's what I think the Kansas City Chiefs are coming into. They are the favorites of the AFC West. They're the favorites of the AFC, as they should be. And they have one of the best teams coming back, and still potentially could have one of the greatest offenses to ever play this game. So we'll have to see how it all works out this season. If everybody stays healthy and with COVID and everything, we'll have to see. But Kansas City definitely right now, like I said, is on cloud nine, and they're feeling good right now, and they should. But coming up next, right here on the podcast, the NFL has a plan, or a reported discussed plan, of keeping 35% of the salary in case of COVID-19 affecting revenue. And players weren't happy. I'll give you details about that. It will also talk about, continuing on in the AFC West review, the LA Chargers and their season preview. All that right here and more on the GSMC Football Podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment we discussed the fallout of Patrick Mahomes' contract, how that affects the quarterback market. Because it'll change how quarterbacks negotiate. We don't know how this is going to change the Dak Prescott negotiations. People have always seen Deshaun Watson as him and Patrick Mahomes might get around the same deal. We didn't know if we expected it to be this big, but we obviously expect Deshaun Watson, I would think, to be probably the second highest paid quarterback after this, when the Houston Texans actually gets in the negotiation table, especially after this deal. And even Lamar Jackson, if he has another big year this year, where would Baltimore put him at in terms of the ranks of quarterbacks? Would they be willing to give him a boatload? Like Deshaun and Patrick? I mean, those are questions that, are going to be lingering. We also broke down the Kansas City Chiefs preview of the season as, listen, they're the favorites. Simple as that. They're the favorites. Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek Hill, Travis Kelce, Clyde Edwards, Alaire Edwards, Damian Williams, Sammy Watkins, Andy Reid, Tyreek Matthew, Arthur Jones. They got to get that situation worked out, but they should be the favorites. And that's the expectation. So we'll have to see how it continues on. But now we're going to get some more news in the NFL. And so, the report is the NFL proposes holding 35% of player salaries in escrow during the 2020 season. And the reason why the NFL pitched this idea is to help manage costs during the 2020 season, since it could affect the league revenue, especially with fans. Now, obviously, 35% is a pretty good number. They're basically asking, we want to keep a quarter of your salaries. We're going to keep those salaries back, a quarter of them. So basically, Patrick Mahomes is supposed to make $40 $5 million this year, potentially. They're basically saying, hey, Pat, we need 15 of that back and you'll get $30 million this year. Think about a guy who just, it's like, just got paid. Now you're getting told, oh, by the way, we ain't going to give you all your money. We need it. Players were not happy about this, clearly. NFLPA was not happy about this either. The NFLPA's response to that was basically they told those owners in the league to kick rocks because they feel like it's kind of unreasonable. It's kind of like, whoa, 35%? Like, what? Are y'all kidding me? Like, listen, we know the NFLPA is trying to cancel the entire preseason, but the preseason don't make much money anyway. So I don't think that should be any type of factor. You know? But to give more retrospect, Mike Florio of Pro Football Talk wrote this, and I quote, regardless, it would be easy for the players to say that when things are going well, the league doesn't give extra money to the players, and the players never get any of this ever-increasing value of the 32 franchises. Thus, the players could take the position that a deal is a deal, just like the league and plenty of media members say whenever there's an aspect of the CBA that, as appalled, hurts broader interests of the players. He also added, if no games are played, the league would be able to argue under the language of the standard player contract that no duty to pay the players' salaries ever arises. If only one game is played, the CBA supports an argument that the players get that full pay. So, obviously, like I said, the biggest thing in most sports in terms of revenue that's impacted is fan revenue because a lot of these sports will not have fans. The NFL is no exception. Even though the NFL is trying very hard to, are you sure we can we get fans in there somehow? Even if it's just a quarter of them, just to, not let the costs affect it too much. But yeah, players were not happy about it. One player said, I don't know why the owners don't take their billions and put some money into it. Why do we need to lose money? Why do we need to be affected by it? Y'all have more money than us. Why is it when it comes down to something like this, we got to give up money, but y'all don't have to give anything? Like, honestly, this would be a perfect time for owners to take this and show that they care about our safety. But instead, y'all are basically saying, not only are we going to make y'all play during COVID, but we're going to withhold your salaries. I could understand as a player, you're just like, huh? What do you mean? Like, really? What do you mean? It just wouldn't make sense. It's outrageous. So, and Michael Thomas actually made an interesting tweet as well about the whole situation. He said, everyone will sit out and not play until they get their stuff together before we do this. So clearly, players, listen, you got COVID. If the owners cut your salary, you got no fans. I mean, the players are like, why are we playing? What are we playing? And then if we play, we can't even get our full deals. We can't even get our full money. Why would we do that? Why would we risk our safety? For what? Because, listen, the thing about NFL is a lot of star players, especially on social media, I've realized, speak out more. And if they're saying this, you better best believe this probably is a sentiment felt among a lot of players. Darius Slay, he said, this bothers me. So you want me to risk my health to play a game to pay your bills? No, sir. No, sir. Even Taylor Lewan said, if this happens, we need an entirely new PA. So, it's just, I don't see how the league expects this to happen. There's just no way that the players are going to let this slide. Just no way. The owners really, you have to admit some of the last few years, sometimes these owners can piss off some players with some of the stuff they be thinking. And this is the reason why people have more respect for like NBA ownership and NBA the league because they don't put their players in this position where they're saying, we're going to keep stuff away from you, we're going to take away from you, we still need you to do the same thing for us. The NFL, it just feels like we'll take and we still need the same production. And players are just like, we're not doing that. So that definitely does not sit well within the group of players. Clearly, they are not happy. They are not excited. They are not anything about this. They do not want this happening. They are completely against it, and as they should be. They should be very, very much against it. Very much against it. But now to continue on with our AFC West review. Or preview, might I add. And this team we're going to talk about, this segment, is the LA Chargers. Yes, sir. Sunny Chargers. Under Anthony Lynn. Chargers, obviously we knew last season, took a step back. The Chargers still have a lot of talent. You know, you have, Derwin James, Melvin Ingram, Joey Bosa. Austin Eckler really exploded. They have Keenan Allen, who has had injury concerns or injury issues his whole career, but he's always, when he's played, can be one of the better, if not one of the top wide receivers in the game. Mike Williams is a great number 2. They got Hunter Henry, who is a top 5 tight end when healthy. They have plenty of talent on this team. The Chargers have always just been weird in this way of just not reaching expectations, not playing up to what you think is their talent. Now, obviously, something big happened this offseason. Longtime quarterback Phillip Rivers moved on. And so right now, Tyrod Taylor is slotted to be the starting quarterback. But they did draft quarterback from Oregon, Justin Herbert, to be the future of the franchise. And people wonder, when would Herbert get on the field? Now, a lot of reports say that Tyrod Taylor will be the guy going into this season. That is an absolute, he will at least play. But it's a matter of, how long will he play till it's time to go? Till they may have to get rid of him. And we don't know. We'll have to see. Obviously, if you look at the draft, obviously, like I said, Herbert was the big draft pick. They also, in the first round, got Kenneth Murray, linebacker from Oklahoma, to help fortify that linebacking core. And running back Joshua Kelly in the 4th round to help out for depth behind Austin Eckler, since Melvin Gordon as well also moved on this offseason to the Denver Broncos. So the Chargers, again, are a team. They have talent. This is not a matter of them not being talented and they just got so many holes. It's just a matter of was it Phillip Rivers? Was it injuries? Are they really not as good as we think? These are a lot of questions. Really, there's a lot. They did add Brian Bulaga to help fortify their offensive line, and Chris Harris Jr., one of the best nickel corners in the game, even at his age. So they fortified some positions. They've gotten better. Obviously, and don't forget they also got Trey Turner from who also is, in that trade where they traded, I believe Russell Okung, for Trey Turner, a Pro Bowl guard, to fortify their offensive line. So they've obviously tried to beef up their offensive line. Linval Joseph also tried to beef up the defensive line. I mean, they've made some improvements to the team. They've tried to get better. They've tried to, fill the holes. And now we have to see. It's easy to sit here and say they will go as far as the QB contract goes. And listen, I think Tyrod Taylor, first of all, we gotta stop disrespecting Tyrod Taylor. Tyrod Taylor can play. He's not a bad quarterback. By any stretch of the imagination, he's not a bad quarterback. He's just not a guy who's going to take the league by storm. He's the guy you need to give him a running game and a defense and some good wide receivers, and he can win you some ball games. I mean, remember, he took the Buffalo Bills to the playoffs. People forget he was the starting quarterback of that team. So he's won games. He still has a better record, and he's really played on mainly losing franchises throughout his entire career. Tyrod Taylor can play. But I also understand the Justin Herbert hype. he's the future. You want to see the future as soon as possible because you want to know, is he really the future? Or is he not? So that's going to be the biggest thing. That's going to be the biggest thing here. The Chargers, I think, again, in a tough division like the AFC West, they're in the same situation I think they're in with Oakland with the head coaching situation. Anthony Lynn has to win this year or else he'll be out. Like, again, since they have that 7th spot in the playoffs now, if they can get in, even if they went 9-7, I think that would save his job. I think, again, this would be a very competitive division. But if they do be the team that ends up last, I'm sure Anthony Lynn would be, hey, we appreciate what you've done here. And I think Anthony Lynn's a good coach. I don't think he's a bad coach by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think he's underqualified. I don't think he's holding his team back or anything. I just think it's one of those things that sometimes you just have to get the right pieces in place. And I think Anthony Lynn feels like, listen, we felt like we need to move on from Phillip. Now, we'll letting go of the guy who's been our franchise for the past almost 2 decades. We gotta do something now. We gotta win. No more excuses. Everybody's coming back healthy. Our stars are coming back. They gotta play like stars. We gotta play like stars, and we gotta see what happens. And we gotta win. If we don't, people are gonna be questioning and one in my head. And the Chargers have the potential to make the playoffs. I think they can be a playoff team in 2020. It's just putting it all together, staying healthy, and also the Chargers have had a history of losing a lot of close games, being better in the clutch, because if they are not, that will also lead to a very disappointing 2020, 21 season if that happens. But that's all we have right here for this segment. Coming up next, we're going to discuss some travel protocols and other NFL news that the NFL is considering and doing. And then we'll get into our last team of the AFC West review, the Denver Broncos, the dark horse, the popular dark horse in a lot of people's minds. So if you want to hear all that and more, stay tuned right here on the podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment we discussed the NFL trying to keep 35% of the salaries from the players just in case COVID hits and they need to pay some bills. They need to be more cost efficient. Obviously, players were not happy about this and went in on the league. Players came out in support of being against it. And so it doesn't look like it's something that would be, I would say, operational if they tried to make it go through. And they might have some pushback and even players sitting out if they did. So obviously, this kind of creates more of an conflict within the very interesting relationship the players have with the league and the rift sometimes that has been there based off other situations the past few years between the players and the league as well. We also talked about the LA Chargers season preview. We discussed basically, listen, they're a talented team. They have talent. They got stars. There's just consistency. They got to be better at close games. And the quarterback position is going to determine how they do next year. The quarterback position is going to determine if the Chargers are going to be a playoff team or Anthony Lynn could be out of a job. Even with Justin Herbert coming on board this year. Especially if Justin Herbert doesn't even play well this year as well. So, if he does play. So, there's just a lot of questions and stuff surrounding that. But we're going to obviously go do what we've been doing. We're going to get into some news before we get into our last team in the AFC West. And we're going to talk about the NFL and NFL Players Association reportedly agreed to travel protocols for training camp and preseason, which obviously is something they need to discuss, is this if they continue to have preseason games moving forward. Obviously, the issues that they came into agreement were about traveling by plane and bus, PPE use, disinfection of hotel rooms, airlines, buses, equipment, luggage rules in for hotel employees, bus drivers, food service standards, and physical distancing requirements. The document does say in there, though, that there will be a preseason, but it does not specify how many games. And obviously, like I've told you multiple times, the NFLPA has said they're trying to eliminate the entire preseason. So that is one reason why. Now, obviously, like I said, the NFL has already cut the first and last weeks out of the preseason and the Hall of Fame game. So they've already shortened more than 50% of the preseason. And obviously, one of the biggest issues I think we have to recognize with the agreements and stuff, and the stuff that they're trying to figure out right now, is that they've had 4 months to talk about this. But the league really tried to go on as planned, like, oh, by the time the season comes back around, this won't be too much of a problem. We'll be fine, and we'll be fine. We'll adjust if we have to. And then they realize, well, right now, the COVID cases are kind of going back up around the time the season's coming back around, so you might actually have to change a lot up, and we have to see how receptive the league is to that. Because now they're having to negotiate and try to talk things out now with the PA, and the PA is just like, listen, just because we're trying to get the season started does not mean we're going to take things that are not in the best interest of our players just to benefit you. Haste what I talked about last segment. And listen, so far, according to Tom Pereira of NFL Network, they have not, between the NFL and NFLPA, have not talked about meaningful dialogue about possible cancellation of games, even though Troy Vincent did say with the schedule there is a built-in emergency plan just in case they had to cancel games. So we would have to see if that's truly the case. I mean, the union president, J.C. Trotter, said that the NFL is unwilling to prioritize player safety and believes the virus will bend to football, which obviously if you believe that wouldn't necessarily be the smartest idea or the smartest thinking in that regard. So we'll have to see. I mean, I'm sure players are just like, listen, we do not want to sit here and put ourselves in position to put our health and our family's health at risk just to play a game, and it's not necessarily trying to protect us, but more benefit them. And I think that's why the players do what they do, because they're not trying to be put into a bad situation like that. Which, as they should. They shouldn't have to. So we'll have to see. We'll have to see how everything works out. And hopefully things work out. But also, quick news before we get into our AFC West team. There is a report that Jadeveon Clowney is reportedly leaning more towards going back to Seattle just because all the other teams that were interested, the deals are falling through. So his chances of ending up back with the Seattle Seahawks are going up right now, as it seems like he may have to do another 1-year prove-it deal in Seattle and then have to try this all again next year in free agency, as no team is willing to pay him the price that he is looking for. And any deals that he did have, teams probably just aren't willing to keep on the table if he's not willing to abide by the money and circumstances that they have presented to him in contract negotiations, moving forward. Earlier this week, there was a report that Oakland had offered him a deal, but since he didn't jump on it right away, clearly that must mean it wasn't something that, again, made him say, this is what I want, I'm taking it. So we'll have to see what happens as we continue on here on the GSMC Football Podcast. But now we're going to get into our last AFC West team and our AFC West preview of their seasons coming up as we're getting closer to football. And the last team we're going to speak about are the Denver Broncos. The Denver Broncos, baby. Yes, Denver. A team that people are projecting to be the dark horse of many teams in the NFL. They seem like they may have potentially found their quarterback in Drew Lock, who had a great showing, going, I believe, 3-1 down the stretch last year, 4-1 down the stretch, and playing very well in the last 5 games of the season, giving people hope that they might have found their quarterback. They drafted Jared Jeudy this year, in this year's NFL draft, one of the best pure route runners in the draft. And a lot of people were very, very hyped about that, especially with him and a guy they drafted before, Cortland Sutton, a player that people don't talk about, who also is an up-and-coming receiver in the league. So the receiving core is considerably looked at as probably one of the best and youngest receiving cores in the league. Then they signed Melvin Gordon to add with Phillip Lindsay. And so obviously that gave them a 2-man punch in the backfield, as Melvin Gordon gets the ability to try to be the future back that he thinks he's been, and Phillip Lindsay continues to be a good change of pace back. We also can't forget KJ Hamler from Penn State, who they drafted in the 2nd round. So they have 3 receivers that they think can all play and be big contributors at this level, with Drew Lock giving him everything he needs to be successful and to be able to win. As a lot will be on him this year, as a lot of people think that if Drew Lock has a good year, that Denver will have a year. They still have Von Miller and Bradley Chubb on the other side, 2 bookend pass rushers, one of the best duos in the game. Like I said, they didn't do too much in free agency, but they did do a lot through trade. They did pick up A.J. Bouye, a guy who has been considered a number 1 corner in this league. Also, especially after losing Chris Harris Jr. this offseason that Denver did. Getting their secondary, and Jarrell Casey as well, who is one of the better defensive tackles, inside interior players in the league as well, fortifying that defense. So they have made some moves. They've made some moves. And they are, like I said, in position to be one of the best teams in the NFL this year. I think a lot of people expect them to be, because they seem like they can run the football. Vic Fangio has that defense playing. They have a legitimate defense, so they can stop some people. If Drew Lock can really build off the success of last year, you would see no reason why they wouldn't be able to make the playoffs themselves. But again, this is the dilemma. They're in the AFC West, which is a very competitive division. Even with all of this, nobody thinks they're going to dethrone Kansas City. So they're going to be battling for 2nd, 3rd, and 4th place, and potentially the 2nd and 3rd wild card spots. Potentially. So, Denver, we'll have to see how it all works out, I think. I think, obviously, Bradley Chubb on the defensive side was out at the end of last year. Getting him back this year will, like I said, give them those 2 bookends. Denver really is built to win. But like I said, we don't know how far they can go until we see what happens at the quarterback position. I mean, legitimately in this division, who would you say is the 2nd best quarterback? Derek Carr? But is it because Derek Carr's been a starter for years? Because remember, Marcus Mariota has not played that well, and yet we think that he could get replaced. So if, let's say, Marcus Mariota was the starting quarterback, then who's the 2nd best quarterback in the division? Is it Tyrod Taylor? We don't know about Justin Herbert yet. So could you say Drew Lock? Is Drew Lock the second best quarterback in the division anyway? I mean, like, outside of Patrick Mahomes, that's the one thing about the AFC West in general, is that from a quarterback perspective, they're not the best quarterback division. But from a team perspective, they all have very good rosters. It's just quarterback is the difference, and that's why Kansas City will be the favorite. But whoever can emerge as the second best quarterback in this division can probably lead them to at least a second place to finish in the division, which will probably, in my mind, I really think whoever gets second place in the AFC West will make the playoffs. Because I'm honestly, I think, to me, I think this is how it's going to go. You're going to have two teams from the AFC North make the playoff wild card spots, depending on how the season goes, potentially. Because if Baltimore wins it, I think Pittsburgh will be good enough to get in, and I think Cleveland, if they reach standards for the first time ever, they could be good enough to get into it. And then you have one more spot left. AFC East, you don't know about that division. If you're talking about the AFC South, we know every year they're usually the worst division out of all the AFC divisions. So if the AFC West can produce a very good team, which I think Denver can be, Denver could slide into that spot. And Denver will not be an easy out. Denver can run the ball, they have weapons on the outside, and they can get after your quarterback. So, listen, Denver is a team that you need to watch out for because they have all the potential in the world. Now, the only thing that could derail them is the expectations, because people are expecting them to be better. People are expecting them to be good. How will they handle knowing, hey, you kind of have expectations because you look like you really could be a better team? How will Drew Lock handle expectations? Because now people think, Drew Lock, he could really become that guy. This is the year for him to really become that guy. Because listen, the way quarterbacks get contracts, if Drew Lock has a big year, you darn right he'll get paid after this year. Because you always want to financially lock up a guy that you think is the future. So this is going to be a big year. The Denver Broncos will go as far as Drew Lock takes them. And then we'll know by the end of this year if Drew Lock is the guy, in my opinion. So we'll have to see how it all works out. But Denver definitely is a team to be reckoned with going into this coming season. But thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Football Podcast right here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Brice Lewis. Don't forget to listen to our amazing podcast here, the GSMC Podcast Network. We always enjoy you guys listening, making you a part of all your day, bringing us into your home's car, wherever you are, listening to me, listening to other shows. Don't forget to leave us a review, subscribe, wherever platform you're listening to us on. Don't forget to follow us on social media as well. All of that will be in the description below, again, depending on wherever app or site you're listening to us on. And guys, like I said, just make sure you stay safe, wear a mask, and have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.